Well, welcome guys. Welcome to Life in the Peloton, presented by MAP. Abbot Kinney Boulevard, Venice, California. Yeah, well, get ready, Los Angeles. The MAP Lab is coming soon. The much anticipated LA MAP Lab. A vibrant communal space for cyclists to celebrate the creative culture, art, and progression of cycling. Well, guys, it's prime time cycling at the moment over in France for, of course, the Tour de France, and what a cracker of a race it's been. But look, a little bit closer to home, some very exciting news last week. The 2026 Tour Down Under routes have been announced, and I can officially say the 2026 race routes are the most exciting in Tour Down Under history, and well, they're actually the hardest as well. For the first time, all 15 Women's World Tour teams and the 18 Men's World Tour teams are expected to be on the start line in Adelaide come January next year. Some highlights of the men's race are going to see the return of the prologue, which is exciting, only the second time that's happened. 2 ascensions up the corkscrew, the first time ever this has happened. 3 times up Wollonga Hill, again, first time that's ever happened. And a new final stage around Stirling. The longest ever women's race this year, 395k, racing up the corkscrew twice, and 3 brand new stage starts in Wollonga, McGill, and Norwood. But for me, I used to like racing Tour Down Under, but now as a fan going to Adelaide, the race has transformed so much for me. I'd almost say I like it better. It's such an all-in festival of cycling. The whole city shuts down with a Tour Down Under village where you can see the riders every day as they prepare for the stages and when they get back and they're cruising back across to the Hilton. That is the best thing about TDU. The red tape's a little bit removed. The racing's still hot, like literally hot too, but the riders are just that bit more laid back. You can really get to see them up close. It's better than any race you could ever go to in Europe in terms of seeing the riders how they are. If you haven't been to Tour Down Under yet, you're seriously missing out. It's a great chance to get out riding with the hundreds of cyclists, thousands of cyclists, that are going out riding each day. There's bunches rolling out everywhere. And you can soak up what South Australia has to offer from its stunning beaches, world-class food, wine, and the rolling vineyards. Of course, the great atmosphere in and around Adelaide as well. Plus, of course, the Tour Down Under race. I'll be back again this year. Check the new route out and start thinking about it. This one is a really good one to get to, I reckon. Well, now, on to the episode. Pro cycling has everything. It's got the heroic champions, the epic battles, the beautiful landscapes, and compelling narratives. But one thing cycling is lacking is money. Compared to the likes of soccer and the other mainstream sports, cycling is really just a drop in the bucket. With no admission tickets, limited merch sales, confusing broadcast rights, and more competition for eyeballs than ever, how can professional cycling teams actually make money? At the top of the sport, you've got huge super teams like UAE and Visma Lease Bike with tens of millions of euros in sponsorship each year. At the other end of the spectrum, there are teams struggling for investment and in some cases disappearing altogether. I was a professional rider for over a decade, and since retiring, I've experienced the sport through different lenses. A commentator, a pundit, a journalist, and of course, a fan. In this special episode of Life in the Peloton that we've put together for you guys, I want to dive into this topic and chat to some real experts to find out what the reality is of the financial landscape in cycling, and what teams can be doing to increase their revenue and therefore their stability. How do pro teams actually make money in the first place? What do some of the key players think about the financial state of the sport? Is it as bad as people think? And how can teams become more financially sustainable? These are all the questions I want to explore in this episode. Just before we get to this episode, you're going to hear One Cycling being mentioned a bit. If you don't know about One Cycling Project, it was a project spearheaded by Richard Plugger, the manager at Team Visma Lease Bike, and backed by 250 million euros from the Saudi investment fund that was aimed to create a new cycling racing calendar to shake up the sport. The idea was that the best riders in the world would race against each other more regularly in a season that was easier for fans to follow, in an effort to increase the audience and grow the financial pie so the sport could become more financially sustainable. Back in June, the UCI finalised their existing racing calendar through to 2028, and they didn't include one cycling, claiming it lacked sporting coherence, which has effectively killed the project. It's a great case study into how the sport can be changed to make it better for everyone financially. So we do make mention to it in a few of the interviews you're about to hear.
Any big global successful sports, the teams of the riders are at the center of the sport, meaning economically, that the revenues flow to them, and also in terms of governance, they have a say. And in cycling, teams and the riders are paying participants. That's the issue, so they are not at the center of the sport.
It is a sport that's got over 100 years of history, not so long in television and tourism. But there's some people who don't want to relinquish what they have, because there is some people within the sport who've got the majority of that power. And that power comes from having the TV rights and best market value.
It's almost like it is now like a self-fulfilling thing. Like originally it was kind of chicken and egg. Now there's just chickens everywhere. You don't need to worry about it anymore. These teams have established themselves as a top tier.
I think every team in the world or in the world of cycling can learn from each other. I think sometimes it feels like a paradox that we are aiming for something other teams have. Well, teams, for example, the biggest teams are aiming for something we have.
The tricky part is that the race organisers like the ASO and then the UCI have just run this sport for so long now that they don't want anything to change, because they make plenty of money despite everyone else not. And so to try and convince them to change for the benefit of everyone else is the biggest challenge.
First up, I wanted to talk with Iwan Spekenbrink. Specky, as I like to call him, is the founder and the manager of the World Tour team Picnic Post NL. And now the team's been through various iterations over the past decade or so. DSM, Sunweb, Giant Shimano, and way back when I started my pro career in 2009, it was known as Skill Shimano. Iwan's a business guy, and now he's kept the team afloat, hunting out new sponsors every few years whilst maintaining a really clear identity of what the squad's all about. I wanted to start by speaking with Iwan about the state of pro cycling's financial landscape to get an overall view of the whole situation. And when you did decide to get into team management with the start of Skill Shimano, now Picnic Post NL, did you have any sort of qualifications in business or management that sort of lent yourself to running a pro cycling team?
Even though we're very structured and in my life I try to plan things, this was actually totally not planned. I did a study economy. I just started my management and marketing business. And then I was asked by Skill, which was then part of the Bosch Group, and Shimano, who already had a team, but they wanted something totally new. It was after all the dark years of cycling. It was after the Fuentes affair in 2006. They asked me, hey, you have a knowledge about the sport. You don't come from professional cycling. We think you're the right guy to do it. So you want to set up a team, to set up a team and run it. I had no experience in the world of professional cycling, even though I did race myself. And then we believed, in the end, what is my passion and what we believe and what I believe I can do well is work with a group of people on a mission to really achieve something with that people. Think out of the box, find a way, develop a strategy, implement it, make it happen, encourage each other, work within the opportunities and also the limitations that are there. So in the end, I answered positively that I was keen to do it. And that's where it all started back in 2008.
What was the financial situation like in cycling back then? Had any teams just folded? You mentioned that it was going into a new era in terms of the clean sport. This sort of bad side of the sport was finishing up. But, with the other teams, any other new teams springing up at the same time? Overall, was it financially a healthy sport or is it an unhealthy sport?
Cycling always was and still is financially an unsustainable and unhealthy sport, at least for, let's say, teams and riders. But back then it was quite bad. We should not forget that the German public broadcaster decided not to broadcast cycling anymore. I mean, Germany is the biggest country in Europe. So such a country deciding we don't broadcast cycling, then you're rated a sport into a group where you don't want to be rated. Yeah, and then of course many sponsors pulled out. Teams stopped. There were quite some teams, also good teams like Crédit Agricole. Also a lot of teams which were involved in scandals stopped. And that was also the reason that, as you remember, in 2009 our team was actually far too small to go to a Tour de France, which they had just crossed out, I think, somewhat like 11 winners, or 11 years the winner was crossed out. Yeah, so they also needed to make a change, and they liked what we did. They liked the philosophy, and back in 2009, even though we were too small, they gave us in our second year a wildcard for the Tour. And that's when things started to really grow for us.
You mentioned before the initial inspiration behind the team, and it was about the growth and the development of the team. Was it that, or how did you pitch that to the sponsors to get sort of the project off the ground? You mentioned actually the Tour de France in early days being obviously a big plus for the team. But talk to me about how you pitched to the sponsors to build the team up from the initial.
In the very beginning, it was lucky the sponsors pitched to me because they had already decided, they wanted to be in the sport. They saw the potential. But they saw the potential in the good things. They didn't want to be involved in the bad things. Over time, we grew. The sport got more healthy, and the sport has a lot of positive things for partners to partner up with. I mean, 1 out of 3 people on this planet, in one way or the other, ride a bike. Whether it's for commuting, for fun, for sports, whatever. It's sustainable. There's a lot of innovation there. But if you do bike racing, there's teamwork. Resilience is involved. As you know, a lot of things happen. You have a lot of setbacks, but you have to overcome. Joy is nice. You ride to nature. So there's a lot of elements that you can use. You can use it in your own countries. And the bigger companies can also use it in multiple countries because, everybody is familiar with the bike and also with bike racing. So when we grew and more sponsors got on board and bigger sponsors got on board, the pitch is not so hard. Obviously, you have to, and especially in those years and still today, you have to explain how you want to perform because a cycling team is not just a collection of people. It's a collection of people, but that's only the start. How do you then get the best out of it? And within what framework of principles and values do you do that? You want to win, you're just programmed to win, but there's also clear boundaries which you will not cross. And that's things you have to discuss.
That's really interesting because I was just thinking then, obviously when you lost Skill Shimano, well, Skill Shimano moved on, or the departure of Skill Shimano in 2011, and of course me, after a solid few years of sponsorship, you mentioned there the team was growing, but the team has changed sponsors sort of every 2 years. It's had a different title sponsor. What's the secret, I guess, to finding a new title sponsor, but by still maintaining, I guess, that clear identity of what the fans can still get behind the team?
That's true. And it's always, the sport is not sustainable because it's totally run for 96%, at least the teams, is run by sponsorship. And per definition, sponsorship is not a sustainable income stream. It's only 3-4 years. It really depends on the people in the company, etc., etc. After Skill Shimano, we had an opportunity to grow with another sponsor, first with Argos, and then with Giants. So that was an opportunity for us to grow. But we have also seen the other side. We did very, very well as Team Sunderland later on. Mm-hmm. Very nice sponsor, very good people. We were very successful. We became world champion with men and women. We won the Giro, finished second in the Tour de France, won multiple classics. So we really did well. And then COVID came. Sunweb is a holiday company. Flying people in and out to holiday destinations, and no airplane with tourists took off. Just no one. So they really, really went to a very, very bad time for them to lay off many people, etc., etc. So they could not continue with us. And unfortunately, we already had DSM on board. DSM was about to merge with Firmenich and become the world market leader in nutritional ingredients and food. And actually, luckily for them, it was the right time. So we were able with them to make a very quick move and keep the team going. But that was suddenly, even though very successful, even though we were happy, Sunderland was happy because of COVID. It was suddenly emergency. Yeah, but we were able to
overcome it.
Thanks to DSM. Yeah, exactly. So you've seen both. Sometimes you can grow, and sometimes you have to deal with situations.
Bigger picture, I guess, what are the biggest hurdles pro cycling teams need to overcome to become financially sustainable?
This show is too short for the full answer.
Give us a summary then.
It's too complicated, but any big global successful sport, the teams of the riders are at the center of the sport, meaning economically, that the revenues flow to them, and also in terms of governance, they have a say. So if you look to successful soccer competitions, the teams own the commercial rights. Of course, they hire a federation for referee, etc., but they own it. Formula One is co-owned by the teams and this investor, Liberty Global. NBA, same. Australian sports, the same. And in cycling, teams and the riders are paying participants. That's the issue. So they are not at the center of the sport, not economically, because even though the teams generate every year 2/3 of the sport in the World Tour, so including all the big races, Tour, Giro, the money to keep it running is generated for 2/3 by the teams, but there is no return. All the profits is basically with one big organizer, meaning that you also don't create value. Even more, if you lose a sponsor, you go bust. So it's very unsustainable economically, but also in things like safety. Teams and the riders will be more at the center of the sport. Things like safety would be really addressed, really as a target. Now that's unfortunately less. So it's not an easy ecosystem to work on. And that means also, in order to keep this status quo, where there is one very big, powerful party in cycling, which is ASO, which is one family. In order to keep this status quo, you have teams competing against each other, not only in the race, but also outside the race, sponsorship, and make sure they don't share into more sustainable revenue schemes. That's the reality. So it's a challenge, but okay, we manage.
A lot of teams see value in other things just other than results, like content, storytelling. We've seen the emerging of that with the arrival and the popularity of social media. How important are actual results in modern day cycling compared to now social media output?
Like there's always a balance. In the end, you live in a reality where social media exists. So it's also a way of surviving that, hey, let's use it. Let's promote ourselves with storytelling. Let's show behind the scenes. Let's show what are our personalities, the human touch. Use social media, use all that kind of communication. But in a way, it is, and of course it contributes, don't get me wrong. And also in that reality, sponsors demand different things. They not only demand branding, but they also demand storytelling. They also demand, and for the right reasons, this kind of media activities, social media activities, growing a community. But in the end, of course, you have to be a competitive team, because if you say, well, we're not going to the Giro and the Tour, your community will also not automatically grow. It is adapting to the reality over and over again, but really substantially shifting the business model is unfortunately not possible. And the only way to truly do that, you cannot do that in a fragmented way. Each team for itself, selling its social media, selling its behind the scenes. You have to sell it like a competition. I mean, there is many proven examples. If you can sell your competition as a whole, then you can really grow and you create sustainable income. And that's what needs to happen. But that's, like we said before, it's a challenge.
Overall, is the relegation battle a good or a bad thing for the sport, do you think?
It's not good. It's not good. And we also have to know why it is there. It's also related to the topic we said before, to protect the current status quo, which is definitely not good for teams and riders. I mean, it's the only sports competition in the world where nobody cares about the winner. everybody only cares who's last. That already says it's an unhealthy it's an unhealthy system. But yeah, what you do is you ask teams to pay a lot, really pay a lot for a license. Then you have to employ 2 people who for many months non-stop prepare a file, a registration file, where literally there's no stone left untouched. Everything is looked into, and then you get a license. And then you would expect, well, if there are sponsors interested in going into cycling, that the sport would say, hey, we have here 18 fantastic world teams with a license, very qualified, and we have, let's say, 18 fantastic pro teams with a license, very qualified. And people have paid a lot for it. But the reality is, actually, the system is encouraging you, hey, let's start something new and kick somebody else out. That's what that's actually being encouraged. And in a way, so you could negotiate downwards and riders get less money. And then if you then look to organizers, there's a fully protected system. And even though we talk about safety, there is not this whole registration process where they don't have to give financials. They don't have to give a bank guarantee. You don't see any contracts. You don't see what staff do they have, how qualified is the staff, how much security people do you have, what are the security facilities, can you pay it, how are you insured? All that stuff is not there, and they get a guaranteed spot in the calendar, even if they really, excuse the words, but if they fuck it up in terms of safety, they are there again the next year around. So if you want to be involved in, let's say, a fantastic 3 weeks race in May or a 3-week race in July, it's impossible to start something new. There's only one place you can go.
Yeah.
And you have to bid upwards. So let's say the governance and the regulation of the sport it's unbalanced. It's the different parts of the sport are treated very different in terms of rights and obligations. It is what it is, huh? So, I mean, we should not be bitter. We should just operate in this field. But if you say, how could it be better? If it would be more balanced, and then teams with their riders and organizers would work closer together and would create a nice league together, which you could promote the sport all over the world, etc. But unfortunately, that's not the case yet.
And finally, I guess you've almost answered that question there. My last question was going to be, if there's one thing about the sport that needs to change to elevate cycling to a truly sustainable level, what is it? Is it that?
Yeah. You can't, I mean, if you want something, you have to take care of every part of the pyramid. And you can only do it if, like in every successful sport, the teams and the athletes who actually bring the sports to life, who do the hard work, who do the suffering on a bike, they should have a fair place in the ecosystem, both in governance and in economics. And what you then would do is you would create clear leagues where people understand what you can easily market. And you could as well do it for a top league, as well as for a second league and a third league. But you have to start marketing a clear product, what people recognize. But in order to do it, the priority first is to change the system, to shift it a little bit. The teams and the riders get a fair say in the sport. That would already be a big help and well-deserved. And it's also, like in any other sport, that's what's also normal, that the people who do the work, bring the sport to life, have a fair say. So that things like safety get a bigger priority. And once that's the case, people are smart. People can think. There's always entrepreneurs, and you will also create a more sustainable business model and a nicer product.
Well, you're probably listening to this while you're over at the Tour de France, or maybe not. Maybe you're thinking about heading away on a holiday soon, or maybe getting across to see the Vuelta a España. Well, don't go paying those ridiculous roaming fees on your mobile while you're abroad. It's a mistake I've made many times. You can improve your connection whilst you're on the move and protect your privacy whilst you're browsing as well. There is a way to do this, and it's this week's show sponsor, Saily. From the same people who brought you NordVPN, Saily is an eSIM service app with plans in over 190 countries that gives you an affordable coverage without having to go and find some local SIM wherever you're traveling, or even worse, paying some outrageous daily roaming fee with your existing mobile network. Over the last few years, I've been traveling back and forth to Europe for the tour and other things, and I've been hit with some expensive quite data restricting roaming plans with my Australian phone network. I wish I'd known about Saily a hell of a lot sooner. It's so easy as well. Download the Saily app on your device, purchase a plan that offers you the coverage in the country you're travelling, install the eSIM, and that's it, you're up and away. Saily only needs to be installed once. So if you're a user, you don't have to install a new eSIM for every country you go to when you're traveling in between. As I said before, you can eliminate those roaming fees, and just like NordVPN, you can change your virtual location, blocking miscellaneous ads, and stay safer with web protection. It's an all-in-one package. Best of all, Saily offers 24/7 support wherever you are. Whatever your issue is, they'll be there to help. If you want to check out Saily on your next trip, just download the Saily app and use the code PELOSURF to get 15% off your next starter plan, or head over to www.saily.com/PeloSurf. That's PELOSURF, and get your discount for just being a Life in the Peloton listener. Great to be able to share this with you guys. I love giving you little cheeky discounts when I can, so make sure you check the link in the show notes and get on board. I love that Specky comes in at running his team from a business perspective, rather than from a cycling background. He's pretty emotionless about it, but it sounds like that's how you have to be when it's so cutthroat and hard to survive. He's really managed to adapt with the times, first through those doping scandals in the 2010s and then COVID, and well, I guess heaps of other challenges the sport's faced over the years. He's always managed to pull through with the sponsors when they've needed it. Next, I wanted to hear from someone from the front lines, one of the riders, my old mate Simon Clarke, in his last year as a pro, after stepping up way back in 2009 to the pro ranks with a short-lived Amica Chips team. Clarke was a teammate of mine over at EF for a few seasons, but he's the guy who's had to deal with more of his fair share of bad luck when it comes to finding a contract. I wanted to speak to Clarke to see what it's like from a rider's perspective.
Yeah, Simon Clarke. I'm from Melbourne. I've been a professional for 17 seasons now. Turned pro in 2009. Came to Europe when I was 16 as a first-year junior to chase the dream, and the dream's nearly at an end now and in my last pro season, and yeah, loved every minute of it, and wouldn't change it for the world. Currently riding for Israel Premier Tech and been through, don't know the exact number of teams, but maybe six different teams. Yeah.
Mate, I'm glad you started at the beginning, because that's what I want to talk to you about. At the end of 2008, you signed your first pro contract with Amica Chips. Tell me what that felt like after the long build-up, being in Europe, the hype of trying to turn pro, and then finally getting that contract.
It was a dream come true, but it was also not a dream come true, in the sense that obviously I wanted to turn pro into a world tour team, and for whatever reason, I couldn't find a spot in a world tour team, despite being current national champ and having had quite a few wins that year. So I signed a contract with Amica Chips, which was a Division 2 team. It was meant to be this brand new team that was going to be all great. And I thought, you know what, it's probably not a bad way to start, and I can just start climbing the ladder and do a couple of years there and then hopefully move on. But that quickly turned pear-shaped when, there was a few dodgy dealings going on within the team, all finance related, in the fact that the second sponsor was a massive company that they were trying to convince to fund the whole team, and had basically said, come on for virtually nothing and see what you think. And they were trying to convince them to sign a much bigger contract. Unfortunately, Amica Chips found out that this other company had second naming rights of the team for virtually no money. And they said, well, we're forking out for the whole team to be only, another name on the team, and we're funding the whole thing compared to these guys who are also a naming sponsor and aren't paying virtually anything. So Amica Chips basically pulled all their funding after 3 months, and we never even got 1 month's wage from the team, and 3 months into the season, the UCI shut the team down. That was my turning pro experience.
When it did fall apart, sort of, 3 months, I was going to say midway through the season, how did that feel like? You sort of explained what that felt like, but what was your idea about that? This idea of turning pro, going the next step, it was going to be bigger, it was going to be better, and then obviously it didn't go through. What was that like? And then I guess what was the step like across? Because you ended up making it onto ISD.
Like, I was just focused on riding well, so I managed to finish top 10 in my first ever 2 pro races in the early part of the season with Amica chips, and I was just purely focused on riding well. I knew there was things going on in the background, but at the end of the day, as a rider, you have no influence on those decisions and what's going on behind the scenes. So you're wasting your time worrying about it. You're just on the receiving end, unfortunately. And then, the UCI shut it down because they hadn't paid us, but then not only were we not getting paid, we now didn't even have a team to race with. So then there was this whole thing. It's like, okay, they're doing us a favor because they're not paying us, but now they're taking away our chance to race. So there's this whole kind of, it's a weird situation because all you want to do is race, but obviously they think they're acting in your benefit by shutting down a team that hasn't paid you, but then you have absolutely nothing. So it was a situation that we didn't know what the right thing was. And anyway, once again, as riders, didn't have much influence on the situation, and we're just on the receiving end. And then, hit home pretty hard because then I'm stuck in Europe in April as a neo pro, fortunately with a couple of small results that I could try and sell to teams with. But as a neo pro, so you're basically bottom rung of the ladder. You can't go back. Once you turn pro, you can't go back and race amateur racing and whatnot. And so I was kind of stuck. Yeah, finally, halfway through the year, I managed to get to ISD, but, once again, for nothing, just to have a ride. And so, I basically went the whole year without a cent of income and just had to survive off savings, fortunately, from the previous years. And with ISD, it was just like, don't look back. Got to make the most of every minute I have a number on my back. And they were happy with how I went the last part of that season and kept me for the following year. So, and then I was back on track and just focused on racing well.
Let's fast forward then right to sort of 2017 in Cannondale and just your experience across there in Cannondale, Garmin and, Jonathan Vorder's team, because, he's always spruiking about how hard it is to keep sponsors, obtain new sponsors, and the continual fight to keep his team afloat. You experienced that in that team. Tell me what it was like being in that team and feeling like potentially the team wasn't going to go on. For a moment there, they were crowdfunded. So, it didn't end as badly as Amica Chips, but you could sort of feel things happening. You're on the edge again.
Yeah. So then I had deja vu nightmares in the 2017 Vuelta. Yeah, we got told during the Vuelta that basically that was when the team was still just called Cannondale. Yeah, we got a phone call saying basically there's no funding for next year. And so the team was looking doom and gloom. And then that was when the famous GoFundMe page started to pay for the team, basically. And you got a free coffee mug. And in the end, that was just a marketing ploy to get the word out there. And then obviously, actually, it works incredibly well because quite a few big companies then reached out and said, we want to help. They wanted to help, but they just wanted to be the hero that saved the team. And so that, even when EF came, so that was what EF came on board. It was strange because it wasn't like, oh, we want to help cycling. It was, or help JV. It was, oh, we want to look good saving a team that's about to die. And it was all a kind of marketing ploy from them as well. So it's funny how at the end of the day, it all comes down to business and it all comes down to what the marketing and what they can get out of it. And at the end of the day, as a rider, doesn't matter what the motive is as long as the team can continue. They came on board and then, look at EF now, they're going great guns. So amazing that they could pull that off, but another reality check of how even at the top of the sport, it's hugely sponsor dependent. And as soon as you have any sponsors leaving, things get very tight very quickly.
Tell me about 2021. Well, tell me a bit before that. Tell me what the fallout of COVID was, because, you know, in the Peloton, we've spoken about a lot of times how the racing changed. You know, I experienced it myself just before I retired, the fallout of what teams were doing during COVID. But financially yourself, what's the fallout been from COVID?
Yeah, that was tough. And I think it was just a lucky draw of which team you were in. And basically the teams that were sponsored by companies that were hit hard by COVID got big pay cuts, and teams that were funded by people or sponsors that didn't get hit hard by COVID actually weren't affected nearly as much. So unfortunately, EF is a travel company, a travel company linked with schooling and education. Obviously, with COVID, there was no travel. They got massively hit with the COVID. And so they just cut the budget overnight for the team. We got hit pretty hard and had quite significant pay cuts. And ultimately was why I left the team, unfortunately, because basically even the following year, the budget was massively cut in that team. And anyone who was up for contract, and it was just unlucky that I was up for contract in 2020, needed to renew. There was no budget in the team. Basically, it was stay for a very, very low contract or look elsewhere. So that was ultimately my motivation for moving. And that's when I ended up in Quebec. Not much better off in the end. But anyway.
Well, tell us about 2021. At the end of 2021, what happened at the end of that season?
Yeah, 2021 was a tricky one because we were signed on 2 year, like I went there on a 2-year contract, and I found out later that there wasn't even 6 months worth of funding for the team. There wasn't even enough money to get through 2021, let alone 2022. And so he just signed a bunch of guys on the hope that we'd find a sponsor. That didn't happen. And the team had to fold because otherwise there was a bunch of us that had contracts that would have had to have been paid out. If the team doesn't fold, they have to pay the contracts. And ultimately that's why they didn't go back to a smaller team and they had to have a year out and then come back again. It was pretty unfortunate, but it's pretty sad that teams sign riders in that situation just on the hope that they'll find funding. And that was what set up my unfortunate situation at the end of 21 when I had no team, but I kind of had a contract for the next year. If the team did go ahead, it all fell over. And then I got to January and I had no team. And that was when I had to go on the team search. And fortunately, Israel came to the rescue, and Sylvan Adams looked after me. And moments like those brings out the best in you because you literally have your back against the wall and you have nothing to lose. And you're like, right, it's either make or break. Am I just going to throw the towel in and retire, or am I going to make this happen and step up? And they gave me the opportunity, and I'm like, right, I got to make this count now. And, that was ultimately my success in 2022 was all due to the fact that of the situation I'd come from. And I just had to be in my bonnet that I got a bit flicked by the system and I was out to prove a point.
As a pro cyclist now entering the World Tour Peloton or the professional Peloton, compared to 17 years ago in 2009, how financially stable is it to be pro now?
I think across the board, it's probably more stable. And that's probably thanks to guys like Van der Poel and Pogacar, who are really, really creating an amazing image for pro cycling. And that's attracting sponsors across the board, not only for their teams. And so I think in general, things are improving, but there is a constant battle for sponsorship. And, as we've already read this year, it's looking like Arkea doesn't have a sponsor, and their riders have already been told they can look elsewhere for next year. And then, so they potentially will be shutting down for next year. Hopefully not, but that's kind of where it's looking at the moment. And then you've got Total, who've just moved across to Ineos, and although they still exist, and I think they will still exist next year, their future beyond 2026 is looking uncertain as well. So I think in general, financial stability is a little bit better, but there's definitely a lot of current issues. Even Lotto has raced this year on a massively reduced budget without a second sponsor, which they've normally always had to help bring the annual budget up for them. So it will be interesting to see. I don't think they're in risk of stopping, but they're definitely not competing at World Tour level because they're limited by their budget.
Do you think pro riders are earning more these days?
Yeah, definitely. I think generally the World Tour team budget from when I turned pro to now has gone up significantly. I would say probably nearly double. I think back then somewhere between 12 and, or let's say 10 and 15 million euro a year was more than adequate to run a team. And now teams are looking at 30 million. And if you want to be a good team, it's more like 40. There was an article recently that Decathlon's going to have somewhere near a 40 million euro budget for next year. And, Ineos and UAE and ISMA are all up around that mark. And also Trek with Lidl coming on board had a really significant injection of financial backing. So for a few teams, the future's really bright in terms of financial backing, but it's a case by case basis, and by no means is every team in that same situation.
Would you encourage a young rider to take this path on as a career financially?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I don't know anyone who does cycling to benefit financially. You do it for the passion. We're fortunate enough that we chose a sport that can potentially set us up for post-career, and that's great. But you should never be choosing cycling because of its certain financial situation or how much or little money you can make out of it. If that's your motivation to choose cycling, then you probably never make it, because there's so many more challenges along the way that will set you back more than any financial challenge. So the financial discussion for a pro cyclist is just a byproduct of how good a bike rider you are, and it should never be a decision on whether to continue or not. If you want to chase the dream and ride the Tour de France and whatnot, then that's great. And if you can make a living and put some money away for the future at the same time, that's great. But it shouldn't be necessarily the motivation to be there in the first place. And obviously whoever is pro, ideally we want to make it more financially stable so that the riders who are professional can have some better financial stability. And let's hope in the future that can be possible.
Well, lastly then, the question is a good lead into this last question on a whole. What needs to change in the world of pro cycling to make it more financially sustainable, if it isn't already, in your opinion?
Oh, it definitely needs to be more financially stable. I don't think anyone would argue with that. How, though, is the big question. It's a tricky one. And as a rider, I really try not to think about it, because I have a pessimistic view that, you can have all the opinions in the world as a rider, but it's rarely ever going to have an influence on the actual outcome. So don't waste your time thinking about it, and waste your time just trying to be the best bike rider you can, because that will have a much bigger influence on your financial situation than trying to change the world of pro cycling. But it does need to change. What the answer is, personally, I don't really know. I know that there's this one cycling movement that's trying to propose a much more interesting setup, which would create more financial stability for the teams, which is great. I don't know all the details about it, but it does sound that that's going in the right direction. But the tricky part is that the race organizers like the ASO and then the UCI have just run this sport for so long now that they don't want anything to change, because they make plenty of money despite everyone else not. And so to try and convince them to change for the benefit of everyone else is the biggest challenge. And, the outcome is we need to somehow create a financial situation where the teams aren't 100% dependent on sponsorship for their annual budget, which is what the current situation is at the moment. What the solution is to create that, I'm not exactly sure. Someone probably will have to lose out in the short term. So let's say ASO or UCI, if they share the TV rights or they share other rights or whatever, they might not get as big a cut in the short term, but in the long term, they'll grow the sport. The bigger the teams get and the more financially stable they'll get, it will grow the whole sport, and ultimately they will earn a lot more money. But it's trying to convince them in the short term, maybe things won't be as good as they have been, but it's for the long-term benefit of everyone. So that's I think the trickiest question to overcome.
Well, you guys can try this one out and still listen to me. Oh, well, maybe you're already doing it because I'm sure you would have seen them on another cyclist. Or if you've been out running like myself lately, you would have seen someone else wearing them because these are going crazy and for good reason too. I'm talking about Shokz. Shokz are the world's leading open-ear headphones pioneers. Want the most comfortable and safest headphones for cycling? Well, here you go. Try these out. What makes Shokz headphones so different, you're asking? Well, they are bone conduction headphones. The way they work is that the headphones rest just in front of your ears on your cheekbones, which allows your ear to remain open so you can hear both ambient sounds like the traffic, the people around you, whilst you still listen to music at the same time. Why do you need this? Well, it helps you keep that awareness of your surroundings when you're out exercising for that much safer experience. So when you're out cycling in the traffic or even out early on a country road, you're able to hear a car or a truck approaching from behind to give you that moment to make sure you're as far over as possible as they pass. But also just that little bit of awareness of people and people around you, other people using the tracks and the paths around you. When someone else is approaching, you're not going to block the whole track up and let them get past as they're going for that next Strava or whatever they're doing. It's been really great. I've been enjoying it because I've been doing a lot of training to prepare for the Kosciuszko Ultra, and these are great. Long battery, and actually, I can still keep in touch with my surroundings when I'm up in the Cobor Forest. It's a much greater connection when I'm out there exercising. You have to try them out to sort of understand. The sound vibrates through your cheekbones, passing your eardrums. Now the Open Pro 2s are out, new and improved. Great sound quality, new different EQ modes where you can change them depending on what you're listening to. Updated microphones so you can actually give someone a call when you're out on one of those long rides or runs. Because of the new wind position, making phone calls is that much better. Like I said before, if you want the most comfortable and safest headphones when you're out cycling, running, or doing whatever you do, because that's what I'm using right now as I sit here recording with you guys, then head across to shokz.com.au, that's shokz.com.au, and make sure you chuck in the special code LITP for listeners only discount. That's LITP. All right, let's get back to the episode. One thing that really stood out to me when I was talking to Clarke is that as a rider, you're always kept in the dark by team managers. You know, you're actually the product, the one out there turning the pedals, but often the bosses don't communicate to you about the financial side of things and just sort of keep you in the dark. Keep that carrot always dangling. The riders are obviously an essential part of the sport, but the riders need races. So I wanted to hear from a race organiser to get an idea on how the races themselves survive, how they generate revenue or even share it with the teams, and what challenges they face. Scott Sunderland was a rider himself from 1990 to 2004, riding for teams like TVM and GAN. Then he became a DS at CSC and over at Team Sky before becoming a race director of the Cadel Evans Great Ocean Bike Race back here in Australia, before moving back to Europe to become the general race director of the Flanders Classics. So, a bit like me, he's seen the sport from so many different angles.
We're in a place where we've never come close to before, but it's been a very rapid climb to where we are now. And I think pretty much everyone's aware of that. What 2020 was a trigger for this. It was always on the verge beforehand. I mean, we had talks with Fallon, and we had different people here coming in involved and wanting to move cycling to the next level, to the Formula One sort of model, which is ultimately the goal, where we can create sustainability for everyone and everybody's earning what they should be getting. And that all rotates around broadcast rights. Changing cycling in a nutshell from a public sport where it's for free, it's used on public roads. We trust in the public to do the right thing around it as far as safety and security, but it's a tourism product. So being a tourism product that you can showcase the landscape and everything else, because if you watch the AFL Grand Final in Melbourne, you see a lot of Melbourne and the stadium from a few helicopter shots. But once it gets dark, you don't see anything more if it's a night match. But cycling, you show the whole kit caboodle. And you do all the points of interest along the way. Every castle and winery, Phil Liggett was brilliant in doing that. He had a road book of just rattling off all the restaurants that he supposedly had visited and winery. But look, it's a tough, and as I can come back to, it's a broadcast product. So if you're wanting to sell tourism, you got to sell it through the broadcasting and media and visitation, obviously. And that's where we're really at this point here, competitive market as a sport to be able to continue the longevity of the sport. And then, all the other implications that I just mentioned, our stadium is the public roads. And for organisers now, it's getting more and more difficult to organise bike races on these roads, but with the standard of the riders. And that's the last piece of the puzzle, is that the standard and professionalism of the teams today is huge. I remember when I was with CSC, we were the top team by far. We had like a 20-25% higher budget than anyone else. So we could spend this money in R&D. We're spending this money in the science. We were doing that. We had the resource to put people up the road before the stage and report back to us exactly what the state of play was. I was part of that, and with the bikes and development of bikes, et cetera, and clothing and so forth. Wind tunnel testing that I was doing back in the time with Carlos Sastre before winning the Tour, and with Frank and Andy Schleck and Fabian, when he won the Olympics that year, same year. So it's like that's been there, but we've just exponentially moved ahead since 2020, because everyone in 2020 got a moment of reset, because it used to be so busy going into the winter and then doing training camps, then going to Australia and back to Europe. But 2020 gave everybody a chance, and the organisers who took time to do a recalibration and say, okay, what do we got for the future? How can we hold foolproof our business? And then with the teams. And then the science came in as well, because obviously with COVID, people become awake of what is out there. It was a big shake-up, Mitch, I think.
I guess in short, you sort of explained a little bit there, but Flanders Classics, the Cadel Evans Great Ocean Road Race, and look, bike races in general, how do they make money? How are they able to sort of make revenue from this? Because there's no ticket sales on the side. It's not like a stadium. There's limited merchandise sales, and the rights around that is really difficult to monitor, and people doing little things here and there. How do races make money actually?
Well, it's making money, but it's pretty much trying to be, the key point is zero operation, break even. So a lot of people, everyone who's there needs to be paid. All the bills need to be paid. So if you're breaking even, you're already succeeding. A lot of events are supported by government funding as well, because there is a little bit of tourism activation. You've got sponsors, et cetera, et cetera. So to make money, I think probably there's only a few who actually really do make a lot of money from doing this. And that's contrary to the belief of teams and riders, because the broadcast production is very, very expensive for cycling races. And I think people underestimate that. If for every helicopter you see in the air, that costs a bomb. For every motorbike and camera person you see there, that's costing money. That's a lot of material. And then don't forget all the trucks and everything else that needs to be sent out. Plus you've got another team in the city where it's been sent to, the images before it actually reaches the box that you're sitting in front of watching. So there's a lot of investment goes into that. And then, different countries, some countries, for example, in Belgium, police don't cost anything. Whereas you go to the UK, and it's £1,000 per day per policeman. So, it does cost money. So to make money, you need to be doing a really efficient job.
So the broadcasting, companies, whether it's Sporzar or, here in Australia, Channel 7 or whatever, are they, I guess they're coming to you with pitches and going, hey, look, this is what we want. We want to get the rights for the race. This is what we can offer. Is it a financial side of things to the race, or how does that all work?
Yeah, without going into it, but too deeply, but mostly it's just seeing it's his appetite in one of those, because you can have an event. So you can see there's a Mitch Docker Classic next week.
Yep.
We want to put that up. Are you interested in showing it? They're going to go, when's the date? This date? Okay. Yeah, sorry, mate. We're covering all these sports on that weekend. No, I'm not interested. We can't show it anywhere. Oh, we could put it in one of the little small channels, back channels. That's pretty much all you're doing is streaming then. So you're probably not going to tick the boxes for your sponsors and partners and everything. It's good to show it, and it's good for junior races where we do that in Flanders Classics. Just stream, so mum and dad at the finish line can see it, and or grandma or grandpa can see it, or ma and opa can see it back at home or whatever, But when you want to hit the big ticket ones, you got to get on the main channels. But it's not only just like channel, because you got all the different channels on 7. So you need to hit the prime channel. This is the top sporting channel. And that takes you need to have a serious event before you start getting there. So then you got all your talent. The guys that like Matt Keenan cost you a bomb to get him to commentate, and Mitch Dockers and Robbie McEwen's. These guys are all precious, need the powder rooms, and they need fresh fruit and soft pillows.
And so this all comes from the race.
This all comes from the race organisation. A lot of the times it does, Mitch. I mean, if you're in a luxury position like ASO, Tour de France, they're in a luxury position. Everybody wants to be there. So they're absorbing all the costs themselves. So there's a difference. So some events need to pay for the production cost, which can be in the vicinity of $1 million a day to getting it for free. So without me going into details of different races around the globe, that's how it sits. And that's from the UK, from Australia, Belgium, Germany, US, France. I know France, but it's not the same for everything in France. Right? So some things they need to pay for as well. It's not assuming that everything is for free. And same within Belgium, to which channels you get onto and who picks you up. So they've got 2 main TV broadcasters here. So yeah, the TV component is a big one, Mitch, because obviously that's the return for your sponsors, and sponsors want to involved in the sport. They're not all like Jerry Ryan, who just loves the sport so much. It's just pumps so much money into cycling. He's pretty much the godfather of cycling in Australia. He's kept it alive. There's a few other, like Drapac as well. He was very much the same. So yeah, it does take quite a bit to make it work. So it's funny, cycling in that way financially. I think you can ask Jerry that too with the team, and I'm sure you can ask a few others. That's doing it with passion. You don't really see it. If you can get a break even from a bike team, I think you're doing really well. And I think if you're doing a bike race and you got break even, you're doing well.
What about when it comes to the teams now? And I know that some riders, it's really attractive to get. Let's just talk about Tadej Pogačar, the hottest rider right now. To get him at your race, that's ideally what you'd love to have. But that's going to be. There needs to be an incentive. Maybe he doesn't want to come. Maybe he does want to do the Tour of Flanders. Maybe he doesn't. But it's both ways. Whether that's him, we're just using him as an example, but getting riders and getting specific teams to your race can be attractive. Then again, for those television rights, then again for the sponsor, it's all sort of helping each other. What about teams? How do they generate revenue? Is it about getting money from the races? What about that side of things?
Yeah, sure. Look, for a race to have it's like a concert or whatever. The moment that you got a big star where you got Taylor Swift, it just sells out. Bang. You probably can't book enough venue or big enough venue or enough nights with her. It's getting a bit same with Tadej. Everybody wants him. It's quite ironic. You saw this year, he had the Giro d'Italia. He had some good name riders, but, not top names. Then a week later, you had Dauphiné Libre and you had the 3 best riders in the world, plus Mathieu van der Poel. So it's just funny how it works. And this is the crossroads of performance. So obviously the teams today, and this is where, as I mentioned, go back to 2020, is that performance box or road trajectory that you have. Riders only racing 50, 55 days a year now, compared to your time and my time was like plus 100 plus. In my time, I think it was around 80, 90 for you, to where they're only racing 50, 55. So you need to be very selective on not only the races that you're doing, but the type of race that if you are performing and you're racing to win, because that's all Tadej does. He starts every race to win. Then he needs to make sure it's the right race for him. and for the team. So there's a lot of money going into it, but the money is invested to win, not to participate.
Do you think sometimes where the pressures come in, where the team may see a financial benefit and the pressure of a rider going to a race for that reason, not necessarily for performance?
That is a little bit like that. There could be a rider who goes to assist another rider or to fill the team, and that's where you do have that. There's also the part where the teams need to gather points. So sometimes they say, well, look, we've got a good rider here. We can't do a lot for him, so send a couple, but we can send some riders to this race, which may be a bit easier or more suited to that style of team and riders. And we can maybe get 3 in the top 10 or 3 in the top 15, and we can gather a bunch of points. So you've still got the ranking system. Unlike Formula One, there's one race, 20 drivers, blah, 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 bang, you just try to do what you do. Cycling is more dynamic because we've got multiple races on multiple weekends in locations. So it's a lot to take on as a team manager on the strategy you're going to look forward. And you need your riders to be A, performing, and B, not injured or sick. So it's a big puzzle, mate. It's not as easy for teams and organisers as a lot of people think.
Do you think the sport needs to rethink how it monetizes itself, maybe with, like ticket sales, potentially? I don't know how that would work, but just rethinking the model?
It's a question that comes up a lot, Mitch, of trying to monetizing cycling and that way. I mean, the classic one is criteriums, where you can do that, where you can close off the circuit. Cyclocross lives off this. That's how it succeeds.
Yep.
It's not a big fee, but I mean, you're paying like maybe $10 and you have a great day. You've got access to toilets and food and all the rest of it. So it's good. Maybe a little bit more for the better seats, and VIP and stuff. But generally, no, the only thing you can really monetize is VIP structures, like what you see at Tour of Flanders. So that's pretty much Michelin star restaurant on the side of a hill where you see the men's race pass 3 times and the women's twice. The atmosphere is unbelievable. Great food, drink, got your own little terrace and stuff. You get transported there. So people are paying a considerable amount of money to have that experience. I myself personally got to experience having Michelin star restaurant. I was actually chef with a group of people on the Champs-Élysées one year when I was doing the setup of Team Sky. So that was fantastic, great experience. We had 2 waiters, we got small gifts, we had our own little terrace pretty much right on the fence. But yeah, that's a small thing. So that's not going to pay for the bills. It's a nice little add-on, the VIP thing, and that's providing a service because there's a need there for it. There's a market for it. But to start getting the 1 million people who attend live to Flanders Classics or the 120,000 plus at Cadol Evans Grocery Road Race in Geelong to start paying money, I don't think you have 120,000 people following you if you start charging entry fee. Because the thing is about this, Mitch, what's so attractive to sponsors and partners is that it's for free. People go and stand on Chalumbra, go and stand out at Torquay on the bridge, down at the steam pack in Geelong. Because it's for free, they can just turn up with the kids. They can ride down, drive down, whatever, walk down and just have a great day out and be amongst it and seeing these international athletes perform at their best. And that's the same with the Tour de France. Why do people go and sit up in a camper van on a hill for a week? They're the best parking spot because they're passionate, they love it, and it's for free. So if you start monetizing that sort of thing, you're going to kill the event, kill the sport. But that's also in the same way, Mitch. It's attractive to the sponsors because you see all these people there. So it's a bit of a conundrum of how do you refine that to make it, give you a return on investment. And ASO has done a great job.
I'd be interested to hear what the feedback has been either from the general public in Flanders and in Belgium in general, but something that the Flanders Classics has sort of, I'd almost say, been able to do best of both worlds. It's open for the whole course for people still to view it wherever they need to be, whether it's on the Patersberg, you can still be on the Quaremont free of charge. But there are areas if you still want to glam it up and do what you said, so ticket sale areas. So it's, I don't know whether this was the model to do sort of the best of both worlds and give a bit of both. What's the feedback of that tactic that Flanders Classics has been applying the last, 5-6 years? Yeah,
look, I think it's always sort of been there, but it's obviously with the popularity of the sport and more international. Flanders Classics has a very large viewership on the day, both the men's and women's race. And what we've also done at Flanders Classics is we have the women's finish after the men's. So that may almost quadrupled or more than quadrupled the viewership of women's cycling in Belgium. by doing this. And also they're experiencing far bigger crowds because the crowds who were there to see the Podger cars then stay and wait for the Kopecki's. So that was a COVID thing, how we did that. So I remember sitting with Thomas van der Spiegel when we were COVID, and he goes, "What are we going to do with the women's race? Because people won't tune in. They won't tune in because they normally come there, arrive early. And that's, with all respect to women's cycling, the public would arrive on the Quaremont to watch the men's race, but they arrive there a bit early because, elbows out to get the best position. And then the women's race would come through beforehand. Oh yeah, we'll see the women's race as well. That's great. But the big bulk, the big rush comes there when the men's is coming. And then the women's would pass and then the big crowds there. But when you're only allowed to have television broadcasts, and no one was allowed to go and stand out there during COVID, because we run Flanders Classics, Tour of Flanders, when it's full COVID. So instead of trying to get people to go to the races, we had to advertise to keep people away from the races. So we had police at the bottom of every climb. They were fenced off and no one was allowed it. So then we had like these goodie bags so you could order it at home and experience getting, all your stuff that you would normally get at a race. We'd send it to you at home through Lidl, to be honest. So that was using one of our partners to try and promote this. Then we had a few other partners and stuff. So we had to get really creative on how we did this. And that's where Thomas van der Spiegel leaned on me from the sports side. How can we do this, Scott, that we can run a race which still is exciting? Because running a race all of a sudden with thousands of people, like 1 million spectators at Tour of Flanders, to zero, that's crazy. You could still stand on your doorstep and look out and watch the race if you live there. So you could still stand.
If you're lucky enough to live on the course,
and your family of that in that bubble, you can do this. But it was a far reach to get to the million. So that's where the idea came out. What happens if we put the women after the men? Will people stay sitting in their couch and watch the women's race? It worked. And then we thought, okay, this is going to be really the litmus test because the numbers went up so high. Partners and broadcasters thought, we're interested in women's cycling now. This is in 2020. This is all right. We did well. Can we do it now that COVID's done? And that was a big, big thing for us. So Thomas van der Spiegel talked with KPMG about closing the gap for women's cycling to men. So this whole campaign went in around that. And it worked really well. To be honest, we did very similar back in 2014-15 when we started the women's event with the Cadel Evans men's race. Very same. Is putting on the Sportive on the Saturday morning. You have a lot of people already there. The women's start. So there's people who have finished already or mums and dads and whoever were waiting for the riders to finish. They've got to see the women start. And by the time the women finished their race, everybody from the Sportive are back. So you had 3,000 plus people there at the crowds, but we also got a lot of people watching television. It's created this promotion, this hype around the women's cycling. So we've already enjoyed very good success in Australia and with the Cadel race with the women's race. That's not a typical thing for in Europe, where Europe has sort of had to wake up and a lot of them now have tried to follow suit of what we've done at Flanders Classics. They've looked at what we do with the Cadel race in Australia, and that's where you see now the Tour de France women's event and the Tour of Italy women's and stuff. They've had to rethink on how they're doing it. And you can see them now, they're positioning to the point where we've got the women's Giro following the men's Giro. Soon, I'm speaking out of turn here for them, most likely going to see the women's Volta Femina following the Volta men's. You sort of get the flow-on effect from this. But where cycling is moving to. But this all costs money, Mitch, and it's a lot of thinking of changing the way things have been done for 100 plus years.
Well, you're breaking it here first. That's great. I love it here on Life in the Peloton. We're getting the scoops here. Scotty, one thing, what can pro teams do to become more financially sustainable? Because look, you've had all hats on. You've been a pro yourself. You've seen it you don't really think about it that much when you're racing, but then obviously moving into that position as a director sportif, then being in the building phase of Sky and then being on the ground as well with them, now being in the race director scenario, you've just got that overall view. In your opinion, how do teams become more financially sustainable?
Well, that was part of the One Cycling project, and that was born from the teams. So I wouldn't say that there's a certain number of teams which have got a considerable higher budgets than other teams, and they're able to be there constantly. And you pretty much see them from January all the way through to the last race of the year in October. So without mentioning teams, I think everyone gets a bit of an idea who they are. So obviously they're investing a lot of money. So speak this, when you have the team bus turns up, Mitch, and anyone else who's been up to the team zone, when you've got a star rider of that country, you know where that star rider is and which bus it is because all the people are standing around it. That's where the autograph is. If you go to the time trials in the tour, you see who was popular. And I actually feel sorry for some of the teams where you don't have a time trial or a big star. There's like, a mingling of diehard fans around that bus. And then everyone else is down.
Mums and dads.
Yeah. You know the feeling. And you feel sorry for them. But on the other side, when you're a rider in that team, you're pretty happy too because you can just get out and get the job done and you not have to fight through a crowd and all the rest of it. And you know that they're not there for you, they're for someone else who's still on the bus. So it's got its pros and cons. But the thing is, mate, to make money from having that top rider is not only just winning the races, but it's also seeing what they can get from return for turning up. And I had this conversation with Patrick Lefevre. We were talking way back apart when we were first starting the Cadell race. He says, when I turn up a race and I've got Tom Boonen, and he uses this analogy, have a look at who's standing around which bus. He said, we don't get anything extra. We get the same as what Team 18 in the World Tour does to what I get. But he said, everyone's there to see Tom Boonen. The only other one that got close was with Fabian Cancellara. But they get the same as everyone else from start participation money. So they're investing so much into Tom and the sport and they're bringing the star. It's not like Hollywood. It's not like Formula One.
Yeah.
There's this, Ronaldo and these guys, when those teams want to come and play, and with the Beckham effect, why he went to Real Madrid to launch the international reach, but people had to pay to get them. We're not there with cycling. So that's where the One Cycling project was supposed to do that. And that was also to help with the broadcasting rights and also for the organisers. If the organisers invested into this, teams would come, they'd come with their star riders. You can sell that forward to your broadcasting, come back to what you were saying, and then the circles round. Everybody gets a nice piece of the pie. Instead of fighting over that skinny little bit of the pie, we've all got a bigger piece of the pie. But it takes investment.
So now when you want the star riders there, and it's probably traditionally happened forever, it's directly to the rider, not to the team. Or does it filter through the team? Because as you said there, teams get a start fee and they all get the same. But it's not elevated if they bring a better rider. It goes directly to the rider, does it?
Not in all cases. Depends on it. In some cases, the rider, because of their programs, particularly today, and go back to the day where I was saying we're throwing figures around of 80, 90 race days a year. My time was north of 100 up to 130 or sort of maximum 128 actually races in 1 year. And that was flogging the horse to get as much you could out of the horse. At that time, you just raced a race because the team would race and other rider, blah, blah, blah. There's a completely different model. So then when in your time and Grady McEwen's had come back to 80, 90 days a year, more selective of which races you went, and you could still do those criteriums as a rider, pick up some money there. But obviously then as a team, when you did lesser races, you would get a bit more of a start premium or what we would call a performance fee or travel allowance, whatever you want to put it as, or promotion allowance. So that's what you could start saying. But now we're just doing in a circuit of World Tour, everything is fixed. Organisers need to pay so much to have the sanctioning of World Tour, blah, blah, blah. You've got minimums amounts that you need to pay to teams, blah, blah, blah. Everything's that, and the teams are supposed to get this, et cetera, prize money, the whole thing. So everything is very much documented and set out in black and white. So then it gets to the point where, okay, smallest team, which is great. We know we're going to get this. We know roughly we're going to get broadcast rights of this, so you can sell it to your partners. But what do you do when you've got a team full of millionaires and you need to pay those salaries, plus you've got everybody else? I mean, you're looking at some of these teams now, they're 100-plus staffer, most of the teams. They are a performance business. There are, getting to your NBA football sort of franchising sort of model. Is that, they need to be able to pay these guys, but they've got staffing. Like in one of the teams, I know they've got men's and women's teams. They've got 140 staff in total with riders.
I guess in summary then, lastly, in order to go that level, you mentioned the NBAs and it's sort of shifting that way, but financially it doesn't really match up, does it? So what's the one thing, if you can say it, if you can put it down to one thing in your opinion, to elevate cycling to like a truly sustainable level, and we elevate the sport to that, the NBAs, the NFL levels of world sport?
Well, I truly think that the homework's been done with the One Cycling, and it makes a lot of sense. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I do think it does make sense. So One Cycling, their concept was, at the moment, there's only 25% of the world's top 50 riders, I think it was 50 riders, who actually race against one another, only 25% of the time. With the One Cycling model was to limit the amount of race days of One Cycling so that riders had to go there, the teams had to send their best riders. So they'd increase that to 75% of the top 50 riders would race against one another. So it would change it. Not only does it change it to every race getting a piece of it, but every race is going to be like a classic or a Dauphiné Libre or a Paris-Nice or a Tirreno-Adriatico. So if you're a 1 week stage race, that's the sort of field you're going to have. So you're really heightening extended, but also it makes it a lot easier for the spectators and broadcasting to follow what's going on because you're seeing those riders coming back and back. It's the same when you're watching football, AFL. After the first few matches, you know who the movers and the shakers are. Same with NBA. There's only 5 guys on the court per team. It's so easy to follow and have a hero. And it's a stadium and there's merchandising, TV rights and so forth. So cycling is trying to get to that model, Mitch, but it's very difficult because of, it is a sport that's got over 100 years of history, not so long in television. And tourism, but there's some people who don't want to relinquish what they have because there is some people within the sport who've got the majority of that power, and that power comes from having the TV rights and best market value.
Now, I didn't actually realise that most races actually pay to have TV coverage. It seems so backwards to me, but I guess they need to make sure their sponsors are getting the eyeballs on them. Scott actually made a really interesting point about the sport having a natural break during COVID and how that made things better for everyone and kind of leveled the playing field a bit. The challenge for teams continues to be getting eyeballs on their sponsors and delivering the exposure they promise. Obviously, the best way to do this is winning massive races, but what if there is another way? Well, in 2025, social media rules the world, and content, impressions, and clicks, they're the key measure of success for any sports team. Bas Tietema is the founder of pro team Unibet Tietema Rockets. He's got some incredible innovative ideas about storytelling around his squad and creating a new school business model that relies as much on content as it does on results. Something that the old school teams could learn a thing or two from.
After being a professional cyclist, I think I'm the youngest team owner in the peloton. And we are having a team that is climbing up the ladder quite fast and are aiming for the Tour de France in the next few years.
Brilliant, mate. Well, when you started the team, the continental level back in 2023, was it your initial motivation and what was the long-term vision of the team?
Our background is coming from a YouTube channel. So in 2019, we started with making videos during the Tour de France that grew quite fast. So we get an audience, especially starting in the Benelux area, but then all over Europe and pretty much a lot of cycling fans. I had the ambition, if we can start a cycling team with having so many fans that are following our journey, that would be quite unique, because normally a cycling team is starting with a lot of money. Then you get better cyclists, you have more visibility, and you try to win. But yeah, I hope to start a team from that journey and those videos. So that idea came up already quite quickly.
You mentioned it there. When you started the team and you had the content on YouTube from races like the Tour de France, was it more like the business was sustainable on its own and the team just came along with that, or now it's sort of flipped the way around? Is it a feasible business now as a cycling team, or it needs to still rely on the YouTube side?
I think for us personally, to just have this a YouTube channel would be more beneficial, because back in the days we were just 3 guys having some freelancers and some camera people working for us, and then we were making partnership deal with brands from the industry, but also from outside the industry. And we could actually make a good living out of it and a lot of profit. But then if you start with a cycling team, you get a lot of people on board, operational people with cyclists, and your salary cost is rising super fast. And of course, also the business model is growing. But I think when we were just starting, or when we were just making videos, that was more easy in that sense. But yeah, then the ambition of ourselves is there as well. I would say the costs are way higher. But of course, with riding on this level as we are doing now, also the incomes are larger as well. But yeah, I think there is more risk and more people involved. Yeah.
In the world of cycling in general, though, like, can you explain how cycling teams typically make money and, what you're sort of doing differently?
Yeah, I think it's quite simple in that. I think sport is entertainment, and with sponsorships, of course, it's changing quite fast at the moment, but mostly partners are in for visibility. The teams are trying to perform as best as they can to be visible at the highest level of professional cycling, because that has the largest audience. And then that's mostly the Tour de France, because the whole world is watching over there. But then you have 20 teams in the Tour de France, and there are a few teams that are standing out, UAE, Ineos, Visma. Yeah. But then there are also 15 other teams that are just racing, and they are really in a gray area, I would say. Of course, they win sometimes, but it's really hard to stand out there as well from a performance perspective. And what we try to do is, we don't have the biggest budget to have the biggest riders on board, but I think we are able to tell our story of how 3 young guys starting with a professional cycling team try to reach the Tour de France. Storytelling is, I think, media and storytelling is super important now in sports nowadays. We try to tell the story of ourselves, and of course performance and results are important, but a lot of brands that are working together with us involve because the engagement we have with fans, the stories we tell on our platform YouTube of the journey we are having. So I think that we are having a quite good balance between the performance. Of course, we are a high performance team. We want to perform. We raced Paris-Roubaix, Amstel Gold Race, big races. And of course, you have that visibility over there. But then also on moments that you are not performing, or when not the whole world is watching, that you are able to reach the same audience as well with your own media channels, and that you are not fully dependent on external broadcasters or external media writing about you.
What's the buy-in like from the riders? Are they like that sort of multifaceted direction where they've got to be a good athlete, but also, they can be themselves, their personality is also getting shown, because after their career, that's also beneficial for them just to know who they are, the wider audience know them more than just their results.
Yeah. For us, it's not an obligation that someone is super involved in social media whatsoever. So I think it's really up to the rider themselves. But of course, from my own perspective, I think a rider can get a lot out of it. So for example, this year we had a rider, Lucas Kubis, coming out of the continental circuit. And I think because of the media output we produce, I think his performances are also blowing up as well. So I think you can get a lot out of it as a rider for both short term and long term. So I would always encourage a rider to use it, because it can be super important as well after your career and to create value around you as an athlete. But it's not an obligation. If someone is not feeling comfortable with making content or telling his story, the main content we produce is about the whole project itself and not about individuals, because a team is nowadays more than 90 people involved, and you cannot have 90 main characters in the videos. So yeah, it's a combination of an athlete who can focus on his performance because that's what he needs to do. But if he feels the urge and the potential that there is on having a role in that media part, then he's free to go.
You've had experience racing in other teams and been around the cycling world for long enough to understand what are the typical issues that cycling teams face financially, and what does it sort of take for a traditional cycling team to operate with sustainability?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think there are difficulties on every level. I think on the lower end, because when I raced, I was coming from a junior level and then I raced at the continental circuit. I think there in general to just have visibility, or that people actually know what kind of racing it is, I think that's already quite hard. If you look more at the top end, I think there's a big difference nowadays, I think, in terms of budget and money involved. You have top teams where some billionaires, oil states are really pumping up the budget and are also performing super well. But on the other hand, you also have still privately owned teams that are, of course, also have big budgets as well, But to be competitive over there, I think that's a challenge. And it doesn't need to be equal because sport is never really equal. But I think some level playing field can be interesting as well. But I think it's just difficult in general how the sport cycling has evolved. And I think you have, of course, organizers, you have the UCI, you have teams, and they are all playing a role in the ecosystem. But this ecosystem has been created over the years. And you see nowadays a lot of people trying to change that ecosystem in terms of who is having the biggest stake and what is how is the shares in financial terms. I think also that's why things like one cycling and stuff are popping up as well. But on the other hand, from a more business perspective, maybe that's the best thing for cycling. But ASO, I think from a commercial perspective, they have done a great job. They created this position for themselves. And is it the best for cycling in general? You can doubt about that. But I think it's also hard to ask just like, do me a favor. So it's like, I think it's a difficult ecosystem in general. And also for us, we are not able to change the whole world of cycling. So we're also focusing on our journey, what we can do, because mostly it also gets more political or whatsoever. And I think we can better focus on proving what we can do. And I think there are a lot of examples. For example, the name that we are having, we are called the Rockets. It's more a franchise name. We prefer to just do it and hope that other teams will follow with Yellow Bee, Band of Brothers, Wolfpack, instead of only talking about what's not right.
Really good insight, and especially to the name. And it's very difficult to follow, the sport of cycling. And when you compare it to other sports, they've got that franchise, that name to follow, and it's ever changing. There's teams that have been in the sport for up to 40 years, but it's very difficult to follow their trace unless you've been embedded in the sport. The sponsors change so much, the riders change. I guess the question I want to ask is your team financially sustainable?
I think still, also for us, we are depending on a good relationship with sponsors. So sponsors are still super important for us to be sustainable as well. I think we have some partners on board who are super interested in how we are approaching the sport. I think we can make a difference that we are not fully reliable on performance. So we have a lot of partners on board who are not only having targets based on sportive results. So you have UCI ranking wins, riding Tour de France, but also a lot of media related targets. And I think that's more advertising instead of sponsoring. I think that's something more unique and also something we would like to improve towards the future, because there is a position that you can generate value based on your own platforms. Yeah, therefore we have long-term partnerships and sponsorships. Are we able to create an income solely based on fans, media rights, YouTube videos? No. Or not in terms of the budget that is needed to ride the Tour de France. Probably that's somewhere between nowadays 10 million and 50 million plus, where all the Pro Tour teams and World Tour teams are working on. Yeah, that's also for us at this moment not possible to get out of only the fans or YouTube videos itself.
I guess a combination of what you're doing, but you mentioned it already with the name and also the model that you guys are creating. Obviously, it can't support a whole team, but do you think the teams in the World Tour can take a little bit of advice or look on what you're doing to, I guess, change the model of cycling to make it a little bit more financially sustainable in the whole World Tour? The model of these other teams, what's one thing you think they could change?
I think every team in the World Tour or in the world of cycling can learn from each other. I think sometimes it feels like a paradox that we are aiming for something other teams have. Well, teams, for example, the biggest teams are aiming for something we have. So that feels sometimes like a paradox. We have a lot of fans of the team. Well, you have also teams who are winning a lot, but still not having fans, for example. So yeah, I agree that cooperation between teams could really benefit the sport in general. Instead of course, you are battling it out during races. But if you are looking, how can you promote the sport and also get sponsors from other sports involved. I think therefore it's really crucial to connect and share information, knowledge, expertise as well. And I think we can have our part in it, but we also have to be honest. We are also new. It's like the first time I'm doing this role. So there is also a lot of knowledge and expertise within other teams that can be super helpful for us as well. Yeah, I think we can have our part. And I think on social media, YouTube, storytelling, I think we can, surely we can teach or share a lot of knowledge with other teams, because some are making it's really rubbish. It's really bad. And it's also a lot about priority, because the budget is there, but they are just not prioritizing it.
They're just ticking the box. I feel like they're just ticking the box. You know, they're like, we got to have this presence on social media. We got to, and it's just exactly what you said. The priority's not there, the care's not there, and they're ticking the box, and it's blatantly obvious. And that's definitely something I'm sure they can learn from you. And it started in a good place when you think about where, the team that I was on, Green Edge, the backstage pass, this was a great, but has it evolved from there? And I feel like it hasn't. There's people are just rebirthing the same old thing, and until you guys came along. So it's been really interesting, mate.
Yeah, and also you always have the difficulty of culture, to change the culture of the sport, because creating a more culture where everyone is aware of the importance of media, that's really difficult, because also for us, we are a fast growing organization, a lot of new people coming in. They are all grown up by their beliefs about the sport, and to get everyone on board with our vision and our look at the sport, I think that's not that easy. And I think also for Red Bull coming into the sport, the biggest media organization, or one of the biggest media organizations in the world, I don't think it's that easy to change a culture of a sport, of a sports team that's only focused on performance, to really get that media at the right place as well. I think Green Edge was and the backspace pass was one of the best things back at the days. But as you said, I don't think it has evolved directly into all teams doing that as well. But there is more media awareness nowadays, and you see the importance is there. But it can always be better.
I think Bas is really trying to redefine what it means to be a cycling fan. Breaking down those walls between the teams and the people that love them in a way that a lot of the bigger teams still haven't quite cracked. So many teams are on the back foot with their content, and after speaking to Bas, it sounds like it's only a matter of time until they get found out. Everyone I've spoken to so far is deeply involved in the sport. Whether it's racing a bike professionally, running a team, organising a race, they've all got skin in the game and have a real motive to growing the pie for everyone, but also protecting their own slice of it. I wanted to get the opinion of someone more on the outside, so I spoke to Dr. Cillian Kelly. If you don't know Cillian Kelly, he's a professional cycling nerd, if that's such a thing. He's the in-house statistician for TNT Sports cycling coverage. He worked for GCN Plus for years, building their app, and he's a lifelong fan of cycling. He's also the co-host of a podcast with the Race Radio boys, Harry and Stu, called DNF, Did Not Finish, which you guys can find on all streaming platforms. Go across and check him out. But for now, I wanted to talk to Cillian to get the real, raw data on the situation. Is it as bleak as everyone is making it out to be? Or is there any hope? Where does cycling sit compared to other sports like soccer, other team sports, big sports, even talking about NBA, things like this? Where does it sit? How much money is there on the table when it comes to cycling? Is that something you know?
That's a good question. I tried to find out the value of the cycling industry versus the value of the professional racing industry, and they're miles apart, as you might expect. So a value that I've seen printed in a few places of the bike industry in general, well, it's over $100 billion.
Right.
Depending on where you look, you might get different answers. I'm never really sure how they come up with these things, but over $100 billion. So that's not racing. That's just bikes and people who cycle bikes and all of the gear and equipment that come with it. Professional racing industry, so really like the cogs, the machine of watching cycling and being a fan of cycling, is $1 billion.
Right.
So like it's 100 times less, give or take. I'm always under the impression that people within the bike racing industry are convinced that there's this untapped mass group of people who are interested in cycling, but not interested in watching cycling, that is we're missing out on it. That there's 100 times the amount of people to go and get eyeballs on the Tour de France or whatever race it is. And that there's this notional gap, there's this notional massive pot of money that pro racing is missing and that can and should try and grab big chunks of. And I'm never really, this is anecdotal now, but I'm never really convinced that that's actually doable. Because, I mean, we had this with the GCN app. I can't remember the exact figures, and I'm probably contracted not to say them anyway, but like we thought with the GCN app, we were going to have a problem. So I don't know, did you use the GCN app? I'm sure plenty
I
of
did, yeah.
did.
And I loved it. You know, it had its issues in the beginning, but once it got going, it was great.
So there was kind of we treated it as having kind of two elements to it. There was the paid subscription, which was GCN Plus, which allowed you to watch all of the bike races. And then there was kind of a free side, which was like a social media, kind of an Instagram for cycling, which encouraged you to upload pictures and comment on each other's.
I didn't have that one, no.
So but maybe that's instructive, actually, what I'm about to say, that you weren't even aware of that. So we had kind of two sides to this same app. And we thought the problem that we were going to have was we were going to have loads and loads of users of the free app, and we were going to be trying to convert them into paid subscribers to watch racing. But actually, the opposite happened. All of the people who were already fans of racing signed up for GCN Plus because that's all they wanted to do was watch the racing. And we had this free side of the app, which nobody really was using. And we were trying to convert
the paid people,
the racing fan, into people just uploading pictures and stuff. And it didn't work. And so we didn't really have an audience to try and convert into racing fans. So it was all kind of backwards and not what we expected.
So I guess the question for me is like, there is definitely this idea, because where cycling sits in the world, sort of, I guess, popularity or, you know, acknowledgement of what the sport is. You know, they talk about the Tour de France being the third most watched sporting event in the world, you know, behind the Olympics and the World Cup. And you know, rough numbers, let's say it's the top five, giving, you know, the Cricket World Cup with India and things like that. It's up there. And, you know, whenever you talk about pro cycling, as a pro myself, you mention cycling, people know what you're talking about. They know about the Tour. Scale it down, they might know about the Giro and maybe Roubaix. You know, it's known. It's a big sport. And you look at these races, Tour of Flanders, Tour de France, they're big numbers there. There's people. But I 100% agree with you. When it comes to the total overall viewing of it, and the real hardcore fans, it does drop off. I feel like it's just a bit of a wash in, wash out. It's a popularity type thing where they people come and view it. So when it comes to the app, like you said, and I do remember back to the GCN app days and the idea that they were putting out a documentary a week, I'm thinking, who is watching these docos? This is fantastic for me. But is there an audience out there for it? And I didn't believe there was. When you take into consideration what I just said, the Tour de France and, you know, the Tour of Flanders, the Holy Week in Belgium, you'd think, hey, hang on, there is billions of people out there watching this sport, but are they hardcore fans? Yeah,
and I think that's it's seen as part of this problem, this perceived problem that cycling has, that it's not stable. You know, there's a constant battle for sponsorship, and teams don't stick around for very long, and it's hard to cultivate fans of teams the way you get in other sports, you know, like soccer and NFL and whatever. You know, fans are quite tribal of and supportive of specific teams. You don't get that in cycling. And I think there's this perceived notion that cycling is really unstable. I mean, whenever I hear Jonathan Vaughters speak about cycling, that's where he goes to in his approach with trying to improve cycling, is trying to improve the stability of it. So maybe I could just give you some numbers on that, because I think there's a perception there of a problem that needs to be solved, which I think has been solved already. So give you a bit of history lesson, right? So the Tour de France used to be raced by national teams. it was kind of on and off a couple of times. It was national teams and trade teams up until 1968. And in 1969, changed to trade teams, and it's been like that ever since. So roughly speaking, cycling as an entity, a season of races and the economic model has been relatively similar since 1969. Races have come and gone, and teams have definitely come and gone since then. Sponsors paying money to be on jerseys and showcasing themselves in the Tour de France, it's been the same since 1969. So if you take the age of a team for every year since then, now I don't mean the age of the riders, I mean the age of existence of a team. Again, I think the perception currently still is that teams don't exist for very long before they disappear. And that used to be true. But now, if I was to ask you, in this year's Tour de France, what average age of existence of that team, of all the teams, what number of years do you think the average age would be?
10 years? 8 years?
22.
22! Average.
Average. There's a little bit of ambiguity there because things can be arguable, like does UAE get to claim the history of Lamprey? Does Astana get to claim the history of Once? There's ambiguity in the history of these teams. But even if you were to be harsh with those histories, that number doesn't go down hugely. It remains kind of above 20. So 20 years on average that these teams have been in existence. There's only 2 teams in this year's Tour de France who've existed for less than 10 years. And that's Bahrain Victorious and Tudor Pro Cycling, who've both existed for 8.
What about Uno X?
They've been around for 15 years.
Oh, God.
Not at the top level, but they've existed for 15 years. So if you go back to, say, 2001, the number of teams that were less than 5 years old, there were 11 in the Tour de France. So 11 teams that hadn't been around for more than 5 years. And now there are none. So it's really gotten quite stable. And like, that's not a coincidence. And that stability number, if you want to call it that, has been going up, increasing steadily since 2010. It's been going up and up and up. And now to arrive at its current figure of 22 years on average. And that's not a coincidence, I don't think. 2010 was around the time when the World Tour in its current form began. The Pro Tour began in 2005. There was arguing for years between, you probably remember this yourself, maybe at the start of your career, ASO and the UCI and Pat McQuaid. And the Grand Tours weren't even part of the Pro Tour for a couple of years. And there was arguing, but it settled. It settled in 2010 and 2011. And at that time, the argument for creating this structure on the calendar and on having the best teams in the best races was that it would provide stability. It would provide a top tier that didn't really exist before. It kind of did, but not really. And, you know, races used to be so parochial, and race organizers used to have sometimes 8, sometimes 10 wildcard invites. They could really do what they wanted to a large extent. Like, if you go back and look at the last Grand Tour that happened before the Pro Tour started in 2005, so that would have been the Vuelta in 2004. And if you look at the end GC of that race, the top 25 riders, all but 2 of them were Spanish. That's how parochial and local even Grand Tours were at that time. And the Pro Tour completely changed that. It took years to settle, but it worked. I mean, in hindsight now, 20 years later, it worked. And now you have like One Cycling arriving saying that they're going to solve this problem. They're 20 years too late. It actually got solved. People didn't realize it at the time, and it has taken years for us to get to this place. But like, it has actually worked. There's 3 teams now who have been around for 40 years. There's 21, I'm repeating myself now, but 21 of the Tour de France teams have been in existence for more than 10 years, and 12 of them have existed for more than 20 years.
So where's this perception, and you hear Vordas speaking about it and others speaking about this unstable sustainability in cycling, you know, the struggle to get sponsors and, you know, to exist. You know, I've heard Vordas, he's obviously, the team has been on its back many times. It's in a strong position now, but, you know, even through the years I went through there, it was touch and go whether it would go ahead. So he said.
Don't get me wrong, it's still unusual as a sport. Like, teams can still just disappear. Even, I don't know, you know, even one of the long-standing teams like Movistar, who've been around for 45 years, they could disappear next year. That's still true. That it's still, there's an unstable element to it. And I've no doubt that it's difficult. Like I'm not saying it's easy. Like I know, well, I'm guessing you know more than me. Like I think Wouter spends most of his time chasing sponsors rather than actually managing a cycling team full of riders. Like that's his job, is to get sponsors for the following year and the year after that and the year after that. It's almost like it is now like a self-fulfilling thing. Like originally it was kind of chicken and egg. Now there's just chickens everywhere. You know, you don't need to worry about it anymore. These teams have established themselves as a top tier. You know, again, One Cycling and Wouters, well, actually, more Wouters than One Cycling. I haven't heard Richard plug or anything from One Cycling about this, but Wouters often talks about this closed shop like the NFL has, where you get guaranteed entry to the Tour de France, and you can't expect cycling to be sustainable if you cannot guarantee teams entry to the Tour de France. Well, like, kind of can now. Like these teams know that they're going to be at the Tour de France. I'll give you another stat. So it's changed slightly just by the presence of, there's an extra team in this year's Tour. Tudor Pro Cycling kind of got the extra place, so that there's 23 teams now. But if you just ignore Tudor for the moment and just consider the other 22 teams, for the past 3 years, they've been the same. It's been the same 22 teams have been in the Tour de France for the past 3 years. And even 2 years back to back has only ever happened once before, ever. And that was 2012 and 2013. There was the exact same teams 2 years in a row. And now it's 3 years in a row. So like there is this stability. I don't think it's happened by design. No, like nobody sat down and thought, this is the way we're going to get stability in the sport. But it's happened. It's happened as a result of that idea that originated in 2005 with all of the best teams in all of the best races. Now, One Cycling have this different concept of all of the best riders in all of the best races. I don't know how they're going to enforce that, but certainly the best teams in the best races is happening and has been happening.
And you then, on that note, what's your thoughts about the relegation, keeping the best teams inside that umbrella?
Well, even the relegation, there's different schools of thought on whether that's a good thing. You know, again, in NFL, it doesn't exist. As far as I know, in any American sports, it doesn't really exist. But like it exists in soccer. You know, it's constant jeopardy for, you know, a majority of teams in any league. You might get relegated, and it provides a real interest for fans. I think in cycling, it's a little bit different, because if you get relegated, there is a chance the team won't exist, and you know it'll all go. The team will just disappear as a result of being relegated, and that's not really true in soccer. So the jeopardy is higher. But is it? Because even if your team gets relegated, your team is still going to be pretty good. It's going to be one of the better teams in the lower tier. So that, like that stat that I gave you of the top 22 teams, like those include wildcards. We still kind of know the wildcards that go in, the couple of teams that are on top of the second tier of teams. Even allowing for the fact of relegation, it's still relatively stable. And it still gives you, or what it gives teams incentive to begin and to chase a place in the Tour. If it's a closed shop, you won't necessarily get teams being created with the hope of one day being a Tour de France team. I mean, we've seen it this year already with, you know, George Hincapie wants to do it with a new American team. Bas Tietema, I think, has wanted to do it with his team. He wants to get to the Tour de France, and you can. There's a way in. If you close that door, maybe George Hincapie wouldn't have created that team.
We spoke about it before, but do you think on the outside the sport has bad reps with teams always, you know, seeming like they're folding or, you know, not being able to get sponsors? You've sort of debunked that in what you just said, you know, but on the outside, there's this sort of idea, and even I had that thought that, you know, the stability isn't there, you know. There's a bit of a sort of rumour around this.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like traditional to speak in those terms, because it definitely used to be true. It definitely used to be true. Teams disappeared all the time and it was a constant problem. But as we've established, it's not anymore. So there is one other aspect which I think contributes to the overall stability. And again, it's something that could all come falling down quite quickly, which is that there hasn't been a big doping scandal since around that time as well. Yeah, so I said the World Tour kind of settled in 2011. Lance Armstrong, all of the USADA stuff, that all happened in 2012. That all came kind of crumbling down. But since then, you know, you can argue whether the riders have stopped doping or not. I don't know. but the controversies have stopped. And like even do you know who the last rider was to test positive at the Tour de France?
No, off the top of my head, no.
It was 2012 as well. It was Frank Schleck in 2012 for performance-enhancing drug in the Tour de France. I think Luca Paolini tested positive for cocaine after that. Performance-enhancing, I don't know. But performance-enhancing drug was Frank Schleck in 2012. So it's been 13 years since even a whiff of that type of thing at the Tour de France. Again, you can read into that what you want, but that's a fact that there hasn't been a doping controversy at the Tour de France since then. And that, I'm sure, has contributed because we've seen teams fall apart completely because of a doping scandal. And that hasn't been happening either. And I think that
cycling is in a good place. What do teams need to become more financially, sustainable? What's the, because it's sounding like, they just keep doing what they're doing.
I think, to play devil's advocate, like if Wouters was here, he would probably argue that, all it would take is one doping controversy and the team would disappear. And it's still quite precarious. It's maybe, using the numbers that I've been throwing at you, it can be considered stable, but still precarious. And I think that's fair. I think it's still difficult to presume a team will be in existence next year, but it's way more straightforward than it used to be. To answer your question, I think maybe that's another thing that One Cycling is kind of giving whiffs of promises about, is that there'll be more money for teams. Let me ask you this. Like, if you were running a cycling team and on a budget of 15 million euro, and all of a sudden you had a budget of 30 million euro, what would you do with the extra money?
Buy better riders, get better staff.
Exactly. You'd spend it on salaries. And that's true. And that has been proven true. Budgets used to be, 12, 15 million euro, and now they're 25 and 30 million euro. Nothing's changed, except the riders are getting more money. If One Cycling gave the teams more money, and by the way, the money they're talking about is not huge. Like, I don't think it's going to make massive differences to the team. But even if it did, it would go on salaries.
Exactly.
So if they're going to do that, maybe they need to introduce a salary cap so that the teams will be forced to use the money in different ways. I don't know, but encouraging a sustainable team model in a sport like cycling, throwing more money at a team, I don't think is going to do it. It needs more rules and structural reform to kind of force teams into using the money in certain ways. But just throwing another zero on the end is just going to port it to salaries.
Well, Cillian puts it into perspective better than anyone else. Maybe it's not all doom and gloom. Maybe there is some hope yet. One thing's for sure, riders, team bosses, race organisers, broadcasters, literally anyone with skin in the game needs to stay open-minded and adaptable. The global financial landscape and sports all over the world are always shifting and changing, and it sounds like if you're not prepared to adapt, you're going to be the one left behind pretty quickly. A huge thanks goes out to all our guests in this episode: Iwan Spekenbrink, Simon Clarke, Scott Sunderland, Bas Tietema, and Cillian Kelly. Ollie Smith from Life in the Peloton, who has put a shitload of work into helping build this episode, and Will Jones from Red Bricks Media for putting it all together. The Life in the Peloton team behind the scenes, as well as the Red Bricks team too. I want to make special mention to our partners in this episode: Saley, Shocks. Get over and get yourself a cheeky little Life in the Peloton discount. And lastly, but definitely not leastly, our major partner, MAP. Guys, thanks so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this real deep dive episode. I'll chat to you guys soon. Cheers.